G'day, and I'm chatting to Mark Masters, who runs a business all the way from the UK in Dorset, and the business is called The ID Group, or IDG. How is it in England, sunny England? Can I say that? I can see out the sky, Mark. It's not that sunny.
Trevor, of course you can. The summer may be a long way away, but at the moment we have to embrace the harsh reality of, while it may be the end of the day where you are, at the start of the day here, I'm ready to embrace a day when I'm going to be able to just absolutely tipping it down all day. But, you know, it's somewhere we're going to come along the middle where the sun's going to be coming out soon. There we go. That's the way that we'll start. That's how we break the ice. You know what I mean? We can still break the ice with the weather conversation.
We do. And given you're a content marketing guy and a very prolific blogger and do a lot of writing, you're in the right business for the weather. You've matched your business to the weather.
Thank you.
Let's get into it, shall we? So, Mark, we've connected. This is the first time we've spoken. We've connected via email. We've connected via Twitter, Google Plus, probably, and LinkedIn. So we're ticking all the boxes. So now we're doing Skype, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Loving the technology that we have, and really, I'm loving your blog. You're very prolific. You're in the heartland of content marketing in the UK, so really love to get your views on where content marketing is what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
But also some of the blog posts you've written. You've interviewed people like a lot of authors: Lee Odden, Mark Schaefer, Marcus Sheridan, Joe Paluzzi, who is well known in the content marketing space as the head of Content Marketing Institute, and so you're absorbing what they've had to say as well. So let's get into it, because I'm sure you've got lots to contribute. So tell us a little bit about the ID Group and how long you've been going for. What are the services you do? Just to give us a bit of context. As we know, context is king. Context to the what we're about to launch into.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started my business up back in 2008, and if we're putting ourselves in the same bubble as many other companies, we'd fit that role of brand, design, and marketing. So we've been going since 2008. I'll give you a very brief history, in a couple of minutes. So that's what we started. My background is in marketing itself, and our little journey along the way, it's been an interesting one, and this is the kind of the things that I'm talking about now, the lessons that I've learned, because I failed big time. I failed big. If that's the kind of one of the areas to focus on, company doing really well, pool of customers, one customer comes in, huge, big customer, lots of work going in. But at that time, back a couple of years ago, 2010, 2011, I realised we were helping them tell their story. Their story was helping to win awards. Their story was helping them win business. So from an early stage, I kind of understood this idea that the role that content plays, building an audience and telling a story. But unfortunately, one of the big customers that we had went bust in 2011. Fortunately, we put a lot of our eggs in that basket, and it kind of hit us big time. So, let's start. I want to start this from down there. We're going to go there,
Yeah.
So the idea is that we had a company that suffered, so we suffered. So my business was on its knees a couple of years ago, and we nearly went out of business. And the thing that changed that, is this massive failure, losing lots of, we had to pay a lot of people, advertisers, everybody else. And the main thing is that we focused on the customers that we had, and to build relationships with people that we already had. And then I read a book, right? I read a book. I've kept it here. Ready? So then I found a book. It was a chap called Chet Holmes. Oh no, it's like I'm kind of self.
The Ultimate Sales Machine.
The Ultimate Sales Machine, right? And I started reading that. This was published in 2007, 2008. Unfortunately, Chet Holmes died a couple of years ago. He was kind of a partner with Tony Robbins, big influential speaker. And he started to introduce this idea of educational marketing, and now that has obviously become more recognised as content marketing. So I started to pick up a couple of years ago this idea what educational marketing does in terms of becoming more informative and more useful to people. So rather than the advertising being on the same old product message, it's all about the customer. That started to lay the seed, yeah? And so from that, kind of grew on to what the company is eventually became. So from where we were, by saying we were a company that specializes in brand, design, literature, print, digital, it's now focused more very much along these lines of how companies tell their story. But the brilliant thing is that we can now pull in all these, I know that the way that the world is now, we're going and we're jumping on all these tools and everything else, which is brilliant. There is still a place for the good old fashioned tools, yeah? The 4 Ps is still got its place, more so than ever. So there's still a place for good print, there's still a good place for DM, but it's all about the customer rather than the product. So what we specialize in now, from a company that was there talking about brochures and brand and design and logos, is now about how we effectively tell companies their story and how do they build an audience. And more importantly, how do they stand for something, yeah? We were talking about this early this year and this sea of content that we're drowning in. Let's kind of, how do we find our space and how do companies, okay, we're a B2B, our focus is B2B. So how do companies now find a voice, and how do we now share this voice by all these platforms and channels that we've got? Does that kind of see where we were?
Yeah.
Brands, good old fashioned product design, everything else, to where we are now, which is all about how companies build an audience and how they share that message with their audience. That's where we've come.
So it's an evolution.
Very
it's an
much
evolution built out of necessity.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, I've had to, and that's the biggest way. I mean, I've now learned. This is an interesting thing. In England, we don't talk about failure. Yeah, that's different. Let's play to stereotypes now again. Yeah, where we are here in England, I guess the same with everyone. Human nature is that we never focus on the weaknesses that we've had. I have become quite open about it by kind of writing about it and sharing it. Let's call it a kind of rite of passage by kind of failing big time and how you kind of pick yourself up from that. What a brilliant story that is. If I'm looking back at that now, okay, rather than on my knees and and the way that it was without focusing too much on it, what it becomes are these lessons that you've learned that you're starting to pass on to customers. Let's become more teachers.
Yeah, and I guess one of the people you've interviewed is Marcus Sheridan from River Pools and Spas, and an amazing story which we won't go into here. But he was one that his company was on its knees, and he turned it around in probably the worst industry in the worst period of American life, and he did it through content marketing. But his story is what's resonated, and content marketing is the backdrop. So if people want to check that out further, just Google New York Times article Marcus Sheridan, or no, the ID Group Marcus Sheridan, and
thank you.
Read it on the Masters blog.
This is the way I work. It's going to be a good day today. But it's like from my side, it's all about honesty, and I kind of understand that now. Is that we can't self-proclaim, that we're brilliant if we kind of have a more of an honest approach. It does make a difference. We're coming out over in this country. It's still tough. We're still, we're finding our way out slowly. The housing market's getting much better. We're still in it. We're still in this recession. It's here. I don't know how it's affected your side, but the remnants are still here.
Yeah, and so and people have to look at different ways, but I've always said people's behaviours are changed. I mean, rather than just rely on the media to get their information, we're becoming incredible hunters and gatherers. We're Sherlock Holmes when it comes to getting information, and often we'll get more information about a company than the company knows, and particularly in the B2B space where what you're going to spend, the investment you're going to make tends to be quite high, and it's all about the relationship, and it's not an emotional decision like buying a chocolate bar. And so people do their homework, and they can find stuff out, and that's why the openness and the transparency works. But as our behaviours have changed, we're happy to get information from the brand itself, if we trust them. And so by putting it out and being open and honest and helpful and useful, then you're going to be more trusted over the journey. So that's probably obviously one of the building blocks of content marketing. And the other side of it, the other foundation is to show, not tell. You know what you're talking about. So that's obviously when I look at your blog, you're putting your stories out there. Your passion is undeniable. You can see it, you can feel it. And if people like your point of view, they're going to be more drawn to you than the next guy. So that was a beautiful segue to Mark's blog. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I started the blog back in January 2011.
Yep.
No, was it 2012? Anyhow, I realised I had a website which wasn't doing very well in terms of the message is wrong. The new website that we've got, it kind of ticks the boxes where I wanted it to be. But I wanted to set up a blog, so I created a blog. I read a book, and I wanted to set up my own blog, and I wanted to do it myself, yeah? And the blog articles that I started with, I still I don't want to hide. I want people to see. I started off writing rubbish. I would talk about, one of the early articles would have been about, it was January, it was snowing. You go back to the weather again, there's a common theme throughout this. So at the beginning, it was about the idea of brands of summer. And I was talking about things like flip-flops and all these other things and beach balls. It was garbage. But I understood I had to start. It's like all of us. We have to start somewhere, yeah? So which is why I leave my old articles there. And I was talking about, I was the same as many other people that would write, how to do a presentation or 6 ways to be good at Twitter or stuff like that. So over time...
Oh, that was you. That was you who did that.
So say that again.
That was you who wrote that article.
Don't tell me that you did an article last week on 6 ways to be a presenter.
No.
No. I did. And the blog started there a couple of years ago. And over time, I kind of... the stories that I wanted to kind of talk about were kind of what's relevant. I needed to find my audience. And I was starting to get subscribers because I was starting to use the channels that would work for me, such as Twitter and LinkedIn. And so slowly it built. And then I started to realize I started to have a voice, yeah? And I realized I started writing to please everybody, yeah? And over time now, I'm starting to write for people that are ready to listen and understand my kind of point of view. It's like we're talking now, and our relationship, the way that we started, the kind of introduction on Twitter, to email, to blog, to article, and now here, was that journey, yeah? And when you're saying, you're kind of a prolific blogger, it's a big ask. We're trying to run businesses as well as kind of write. But now I'm realizing, I've always wanted to be a journalist. That was one of my things. But now, we can be that. Yeah. But it's our way now of separating ourselves from everybody else and how we find our own voices. I found my voice. I kept to it. I found a point of view by talking about things that are relevant. Let's kind of say small business is my ideal audience. That's how and that's where it started, and that's where it's tending to go.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So, and I must say that you wouldn't be the only one whose first articles weren't up to scratch, because that's how you learn. And by leaving them on, that is actually showing your evolution, because all companies and bloggers have an evolution. So, so that be that as may. Now, how many times would you blog per month? How many times would you post?
Because that's always an interesting question, isn't it? When people say, how many times should I write? And I write on average, it was around about 3 articles per week, right? Yep. And so it was around 3 articles per week, and now it's kind of down to 2. And now it is down to that idea of quality over quantity, right? I know we've all heard it many, many times. Yep. Now what I'm seeing is that, I have my interviews. I have the Talking Content Marketing initiative that's underway, and then I will start to write long-form content on a particular topic. Yeah. So that time that was spent writing 300 to 450 words is now becoming 8 to 1,000 words. So you're becoming more thinking, more considered. Yep. So on average, I try and make sure that I write there's at least 2 articles per week, and how that, and share that via the different platforms that I use. But I did dip in and dip out. You know, you kind of have to have an interest and a belief in what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And all I did was open my eyes to the world and find about things that frustrate me, that annoy me, and I write about it. You know, you're never there to kind of slag people off or pour fire on somebody. But if there's something that I'm starting to believe in, that comes back to finding your voice. And if you know you want to stand for something,
having a point of view.
And that is the biggest critical thing of how we're going to be accepted, right? Is if we kind of have that point of view and people understand what we're trying to say, it becomes a lot easier than rather than be vanilla and talking about the 6 reasons or the 7 reasons why we have to read this. By the way, I hate the word ninja and rock star. I can't read any more of those ones.
I'm just thinking, no, I don't think I've written those words. So I've always found that 8 to 10 is a really optimum. People say, there's a couple of things, how many times you should blog? Well, there are people that have done really well in blogging and built massive audiences. And if the quality is up, blog more, because you're going to bring more people in. If you can keep the quality up, 4 a week is better than 1 a week. Really, because you might reach 4 times the people. But if the quality's not there, well, then don't do 4. And the same with the size of a blog post. How long is an optimum size? Well, whatever it takes. If you can say it like Seth Godin in 1 sentence sometimes, that's all it needs. But I think there is a swing back to the longer form content, which is more considered, more depth, because the subject warrants it.
Yes, because there's this wealth of knowledge that's out there. And it's now as kind of making the most of it. And if there's stuff that's going on that's current, I've started to write an article about why we need to be believable. And let's have a look at what's going on. And it's how we dig deeper. And it all comes down to our own interest, our own belief, and our own kind of perception. The early days when we write about those 6 reasons to be, you end up becoming the same as everybody else. I mean, it's still really difficult to kind of find your space. But it can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's experimentation. You learn. I remember when I first started blogging that I reckon I learned more in 6 weeks of actually blogging than 12 months of reading about it. And it's like swimming, isn't it? You could learn all the technique, but just do it, and find your voice. And it's nothing more sobering than pushing the publish button as well. Do I really believe in this?
Correct, because it's the way that I kind of would say to people is that anything that comes into your head, I kind of write it down. With our mobiles and everything else, in my notes, stuff that comes into stuff that I see, I write it down now. That's the only way of documenting it. Then straight away, I've got a content calendar of articles to kind of talk about. And it's just by being interested in the world that you're part of.
Are you a Moleskine notepad man or an Evernote app?
Oh no, here we go. No, what do I use? No, Evernote. That's it. Evernote. Come, here we go. Let's talk about let's go down the world of apps now and turn into proper nerd.
Now, what I wanted, because you have interviewed some interesting people along the journey, so you have a broad spread of views, and you're well read anyway. But just from the people that you've checked out and interviewed, plus what you already know, what's your view of where content marketing is headed at this point?
Okay.
Where do you think, and where are you now, and where do you think it's heading, and that side of things?
From the interviews that I've done, so I started this in October last year. So it's called Talking Content Marketing, and I wanted to bring the people that I were interested in, the authors, the influencers, and see what their point of view is. So I started this up, it's just a kind of a project to see where it went. And now it's kind of becoming such a interesting, wide and varied project because, it's how do these things work? How do we get influencers and people, who am I? Do you know what I mean? Who am a business here on the south coast of England, and you're talking to these, I like it, everyone almost becomes kind of celebrity-like. Do you know what I mean? Everyone wants to, be the next Gary Vaynerchuk or whatever, but we all kind of, everyone's becoming kind of celebrities in their own right. So all these people I interviewed and still interviewing, but what I'm kind of seeing is that the overriding thing that I'm taking, if there is a kind of takeaway from what I've kind of learned from the many people that I've spoken to, is that, you know, a lot of us are embracing this world of content marketing, and we're all embracing this idea of how we share it. But what we need to become better is this idea of strategy, is this idea that we need to understand the message that we're doing. We have to take a step back. I was reading an article on LinkedIn the other month from Barry Feldman and Joe Polizzi. It was about the idea of our mission, our content mission statement. What we're kind of looking at, this idea of strategy and thinking behind where we're trying to take it. And the other kind of idea is that, you know, these simple ideas that we need to understand who our audience is and who we want to talk to. And everyone that I've kind of interviewed and spoken to is this idea that if we can build an audience, we need to know that profile of a person that we're talking to. It's like we're in a newsagent and there's all the magazines that are on the rack, but what is that magazine and who are they talking to and what does it look like and what does it say inside? What are the articles? What are their interviews? Are they kind of profiles? Is their opinion? And this idea of understanding an audience is really key on what we need to focus on, because it comes back to ourselves. You know, when I started writing and everything else, it was for everybody. It was just for everybody, and then I just blend in with everybody else. But we're trying to build an audience. That's becoming really important. And the other thing is just Robert Rose kind of picked up on this, and then there seems to be a kind of thing, quite a common thing when talking to a lot of people, is that I love it that Robert Rose says that the storytelling is the only differentiator that we have left. I know it's kind of a Reddit kind of headline that goes with that, but I kind of love this idea that, you know, everything is changing at such a pace, but we do have the opportunity to use all these channels and platforms, but it's what's ingrained in us or our businesses. These are the stories. I have a client, for instance, and they will say to us, and they have said to us, you know, our industry, what we do isn't, you know, it's not very interesting. All we want to do is sell products. And it's like, no, come on. Every company, you know, we do have a story inside us. You know, it's like myself when I first started talking and, you know, the problems that the business had a couple of years ago. Let's kind of use this to tell a story. Rather than it being a weakness, I understand what we're saying, that this is a differentiator, because if we're telling a story, then we're becoming a lot more human. We're being a lot more normal. Let's embrace being normal again. I know we're here and we're fighting on timelines on Twitter and everything else to try and clamber above somebody else to listen to us and look, you know, come over to our website. But if we're just being honest and open and human, it was on Top Rank last week, and Lee had asked a lot of people where they see in 2015. And it's kind of interesting, the people that were on my site, I don't want to name drop, but a lot of people that were on our site, and it's kind of interesting to see what they're kind of saying. And the consensus that I'm taking it is that it's about becoming a lot more human. It's kind of understanding our audience. And I like this idea of the media companies that we're effectively becoming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's the stories. It's the only differentiator. Ultimately, it's still, well, the more things have changed, the more they've stayed the same. What hasn't changed is we've still got 24 hours in the day. And we still love stories. I mean, we're hardwired. You're not going to change that. And social media, etc., just amplifies our ability to tell and receive stories, and that's that emotional connection. And you're right. You see the ones that have done it well. They are storytellers. And there's a couple of articles now. You know I just can't remember who wrote them. There was one though that was really interesting about the number one business skill you will need in the future years, and that was storytelling. So there must be some people out there that have been teaching storytelling to script writers and stuff, and no doubt they'll be hanging their shingle in a corporate sense soon anyway. Because
but that kind of dynamic's changing as well, isn't it? I mean, from our side, you know, we're working with a lot more journalists now. Those people that were designers or freelance, you know, or designers, art workers, whatever, is being replaced via journalists that are on board.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, journalists are getting jobs in. We've got in Melbourne, ANZ Bank is one of the top couple of banks in Australia, and they've put on one of the former editors of the premier business publications, and one of the top business journalists in the country. That's the head of content or digital, or whatever her title is. Her name is Amanda Gome, and that's a signal that if a big bank's doing that, and then we're now starting to see the fruits of that. She's employed other journalists, and I'm biased because I'm an ex-journalist, but journalists, if they do one thing very well, they know a story, and it's ingrained. So not only can they write quickly and sharply, but they've got a nose for a story, and it's ingrained in them. So it is a skill that people are going to have to learn. Some people pick it up intuitively just from being around, being in the media game, but it's a hard thing. I think it's a reasonably hard thing to teach, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it is, but it's how we do that. It's like if we've got 140 characters, how do we, I'm a massive advocate of it. It's how we say it and how we structure what we're trying to say. And yeah, that moment we've got to get somebody's attention. It's everything. It's everywhere now. It's there's right through to video content and everything else that we're putting. I saw it the other week. A friend had kind of worked on a project for a bar locally, but it was the same as everybody else. It was a bar that was showing people drinking and people eating food, and it was just the same as everything else. Whereas the stories that we tell now is the food that gets delivered at 5:30, 6 in the morning, and the doors opening. All it is just kind of opening our heads and looking around us and kind of knowing that there are ideas and being creative with it. But we're still using these these techniques that we've been used to. So if it is going down the line of video content and everything else, we're still using the same systems. We're just telling it a bit differently.
And I guess the other thing is that, particularly with smaller businesses or more manageable businesses with people in terms of size, people do business with people, not logos, and that's not going to change. And so put your people out there. Don't hide them. And they've got stories to tell.
When you go to pitch sites like People Per Hour, and there's people doing logos now for $10 or whatever, then the world's certainly changing as well. Let's put it that way.
There's disruption. I mean, you're from the design industry, which is disrupting, from public relations, which is disrupted in a good way. I think if I was in advertising, I'd be a bit worried because their whole model is under a bit of threat. You'd have to say. I mean, all indications they need to, but. They tell stories, but can they tell stories in ways that are interesting versus about the company? That's the interesting thing. And in PR, we've always told stories, and we've always dealt with influencers and build. I call PR now public relationships. And it's the relationships a brand builds, or the people within a company build with the market in which they operate, with the community, the village of support that they build and grow and cultivate. And it's all rolled out in public, whereas it wasn't before. And so we can see that.
You've just touched upon an interesting thing there where you said that word community. Do you know what I mean? It's having to make what we're doing believable. Do you know what I mean? We have to be seen as part of what we're doing. It's like, I kind of talk about the idea that we're here to make money out of the places where we work, but we're also here to kind of serve our communities. And all this stuff all goes in hand in tandem. Because we're all this idea of we're relearning, aren't we? We're kind of relearning our skill sets. It was really a really good book, Mitch Joel, when he did his Control-Alt-Delete last year.
Good book.
Best book I read last year. But I love this idea that we're going to have to relearn our skill sets. And we have to know what's relevant to the people that we're talking to. Which is brilliant, because the majority of people are still doing it the way that we've always done it. Do you know what I mean? It's like if we're on LinkedIn and a lot of people are on there talking about how brilliant they are and how well their own company is doing, and aren't they talented? To the other side, what you're doing, and hopefully people are seeing that from my side, is the idea of we're becoming more useful and becoming more, as I said, more human and more normal and informative.
Yeah,
great book. I hate quoting. It makes me feel more. If I'm kind of quoting books, and it makes me feel more of a rounded individual. There's a lady called Sonia Jefferson, and it was this idea, and she wrote in her book about people were saying that why are you giving all this information to people? And the idea is, I'm not taking this, I'm giving her credit for that. And there was an old comedian. There was the idea of why should you be giving information, or why should you be useful to people when they can just take it and apply it themselves? And there was a story about an old comedian in the UK called Bob Monkhouse. And Bob Monkhouse was around for many years, died 10 or so years ago, I guess, and he was just a good gag maker, yeah, good at telling jokes. And in 1995, somebody stole his joke book, yeah, something that had been going for decades and decades. And somebody said, well, nobody become the next Bob Monkhouse. If somebody stole his book, nobody become a better joke teller. It's kind of this idea that people are not scared, but kind of reticent to kind of open up. You know, maybe people may see that I'm wrong for opening up too much. But if it is a case of, if we're kind of saying something and not being scared about it, this comes back to this idea of relearning again, and where we see all these platforms, just being open and sharing the information and the use that we can be to people.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think, and they're the softer things that it's a bit more harder to quantify, and that's probably where the issue is. But when you step back and look at join the dots and see where the world's going, and you know, businesses are socializing and becoming more connected. The smart companies are becoming a lot more connected to the community, and social media and content are parts of that. It's not everything, but it's probably been the driving force, because you can't do that through advertising. So, all interesting times. I want you to, we're just cognizant of time, just leave us with one. Is there a gem you can leave us with, but just without notice? Is there one big tip for a business that's wanting to embark on a content marketing strategy? What's the main thing you want them to think about?
Okay, if there was something for them to kind of take from it and think about if they're looking at this kind of journey to go on, is to understand what they kind of enjoy, is to kind of, can we find opinion? Yeah, that's the only way that we can kind of stand out, is by understanding our side of the road and sticking to it. Can we find something that, it doesn't matter what industry that we're in, no matter if the customer may say that our industry is not very interesting or sexy or whatever. If there's somebody out there looking to embark on the kind of journey in terms of writing, in terms of blogging, you have to kind of have something to write about, and it has to be from your own particular angle. It's easy to kind of we can take stuff and we can be influenced by stuff out there, but one of the biggest changes from my side, yeah, and this is my one thing, so I'm going to give it two.
In fact, action-packed, value-added.
Look, it's this, my friend. You know, this is going to be a very valuable podcast. You know what I mean? So what we've got this idea of you have to kind of have an opinion and talk about something that's of interest. My other thing that I would say is read. Not necessarily blogs, but I'm saying don't necessarily read blogs. There's nothing wrong. Let's get back into the good old-fashioned reading. That, to me, has been the biggest change to me as a person, is by sitting down, being quiet, and reading, yeah? Because we can all be influencers in this world now. Say that again.
Bit of reflection.
Yeah, and by reading something that's been published and something that's out there, I should give this a plug for micro-domination, shouldn't I?
Micro-domination, funny. What's micro-domination? Sorry.
Let's plug the book. It's telling the magic. But what I would say is to read. I would say to read about your industry, what you're interested in, because your mind does work completely different from reading something in a book format as opposed to something on screen via a blog. That has changed me massively, and that is my biggest thing I would give to people to take away from.
Well, thank you, Mark. That you've been carpet bombing nuggets of gold there.
Thanks, Trevor. I like that. I'm gonna quote that Trevor Young says.
You can do that. But thanks a lot, Mark. You've got no doubt a busy day ahead of you, and I'll put all the links certainly to the blog. I recommend people read it, not only for the interviews, but you know you've got some gems in there, and again it's good, you know, for people to read other people's opinions from around the world, not just in your own backyard or not just America, but what's happening in your neck of the woods as well, and getting your experiences with different sorts of businesses, because we can learn from everyone. So thank you again, my friend. Great to finally talk in real life. Is this in real life or virtual? I don't know.
This is real life.
This is real virtual life.
You could have been talking to me, and I could have been stumbling about and in my pajamas or something else, but you've got me for a
far as you know, I could be just in my pants underneath this, but it's kind of. But thank you for the opportunity to talk, because this is how it works. We connected on Twitter, we moved that conversation to email, and you kind of helped out as one of the influencers on the Talking Content program. You know, this is how it all works. You know, we're thousands and thousands of miles apart, and you know, rather than getting dewy-eyed and everything else, but you know, you're a completely different part of the world, but all this stuff works.
Yeah.
It's brilliant, and thanks very much for asking us. I do appreciate it.
No problem, Mark. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay, see ya.
See you then.